We're taking a look at the latest NHL trade rumors as we get closer to the trade deadline. We're taking a look at tonight at teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs, the St. Louis Blues, the New York Islanders. We're looking at the Hawks, the Sharks, and Sabres, and many more. Plus, the Canucks have been shut down for a week, and Chandler Stevenson has been suspended. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, before we jump into the trade rumors, a couple other quick notes here. One of which might set me off on a little bit of a rant, and that's the Chandler Stevenson suspension that's just been announced a short time ago by NHL Player Safety. Now, it's not even so much that he was suspended, it's how many games and how it compares to other recent events that we've seen with very similar type play. So, Vegas Golden Knights forward Chandler Stevenson has been suspended for 3 games by Player Safety for a late, dirty, reckless hit with an elbow up high to the head of Kings defenseman Tobias Bjornfoot. Now, definitely should be suspended. I don't like the hit. It was late. It was high, unnecessarily. It's not like his elbow rode up into the head or anything. It looked like he was targeting the head. It was just a really bad, awful play in my opinion, and that type of thing shouldn't be happening. So suspension, 100% justified. He's got no history though, so it's the first time offense we've seen from a player like him, and he gets 3 games, which seems a little much, but at the same time, the injury to the player has been factored in here as well. I'd be much more okay with a suspension if it didn't make NHL Player Safety look like a really bunch of hypocrites here. I mean, they just fined Connor McDavid $5,000, which the amount is fine because that's the max they can do. Whatever. That's not the point here. You get a fine for a reckless elbow to Jesperi Kotkaniemi. And you know what? Some say it didn't hit the head first. It was on the shoulder and came up. Whatever. Either way, it was a dirty elbow. Unnecessary. The puck was gone. It was late. He was just frustrated. He got pissed off and he crossed the line. Just as simple as that. And really, it's not drastically different. Now, the one difference here, I guess, is that the player wasn't really hurt. Kotkaniemi was able to continue playing the rest of the game. He's fine. So obviously, Bjornfoot's injury is more severe. They do factor that in, and I get that, and I'm fine with that as well. However, to give Connor McDavid a 1-game suspension even would have been much better here in this case to set the precedence that it doesn't matter what the name is on the jersey. If you break the law, you break the law. It's just that simple. Do the crime, do the time, instead of a slap on the wrist with a peanut fine. That makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, at the end of the day here, McDavid even has prior history. He actually was suspended once before, more than Stevenson. So there's more history, equal amount of intent, slightly different outcome on the player that was receiving the bad play. But still, they look like hypocrites when you fine McDavid $5,000 and you sit Stevenson for 3 games. How can you call this justifiable and fair across the board? It's just not the case. I've seen the argument about McDavid and Crosby and McKinnon and star players that take a lot of abuse and things that don't get called, and I get that as well. I'm not convinced either that the referees and the officials really protect the star players as much as they should. So what, when they lash out, I'm not going to really get too upset about it, but at the same time, doesn't mean they shouldn't be punished for their crimes. It's no different than when you see a play going on, 2 players battling, one guy getting cross-checked and cross-checked and cross-checked and no call, but then the second he retaliates, the ref arm goes up and he gets the call. How many times do we see that? It's no different here. So NHL, you need to get your damn act together. You need to be consistent. It doesn't matter what the name is on the jersey. It's what happened. Just plain and simple. Get it right, make it fair, or you're really going to start pissing off a lot of fans, and it's just not right. Now we're going to move on to some other news here. The Vancouver Canucks, unfortunately, have been shut down for about a week. They're targeting an April 8th return. We know that they were having some issues with some positive COVID tests, which kind of delayed things a little bit here in the last few days. We know that Travis Hamonic and Adam Gaudette are both on the COVID protocol list now for Vancouver, and I believe they had indicated yesterday that at least one member of their coaching staff had tested positive as well. So that's obviously not a good sign, especially within the coaching staff. They work so closely together. And depending on what strain of the virus they get, it certainly can be very transmissible and certainly not a good scene. So it could impact a lot of people very, very quickly. So it's best that they do this like they did in Montreal, shut things down, limit the number of people that are impacted, and they can resume here play hopefully in a week's time. So hopefully everybody involved is okay and doesn't really have anything too severe take place with symptoms for those who are positive tests. and we'll hopefully get them back in action sooner than later. But of course, the NHL will have to rejig the schedule here a little bit, and obviously that's the second case now we've seen in the North Division in Canada after having such a long, successful run of not really being impacted by the virus. Now jumping over to the latest NHL Trade Talk, I want to discuss some recent reports here by Elliot Friedman indicating that the Maple Leafs are certainly doing their due diligence on goaltending in case the news on Freddie Andersen is not great, and in case he ends out much longer than he's expected to be, or on the odd chance that the season is done. Now, I know we had remarks from Sheldon Keefe today indicating that things were progressing, but Freddie Andersen would not be joining them for their current road trip. So obviously, it's going to be a little while yet, but we really don't know much about the injury, what he's dealing with, or what kind of timelines he's looking at for a return. Is he still seeking medical advice? Like, we really don't know much. They haven't revealed a whole lot of anything. So as Friedman's mentioned, they're just doing due diligence. I don't think any kind of a trade is imminent here, and they'll probably wait right up to the last minute if they can to get a better, more clear picture of Anderson's situation. I don't really see a situation that they want to go into the playoffs with Campbell and Hutchison being 1-2. I think they're feeling pretty good about Jack Campbell right now. Jack Campbell's been excellent for the Leafs. Looks as though he could be a legitimate starter in the playoffs, and they would be comfortable, but I'm not sure that they'd be totally comfortable here with Hutchison riding the backup role. I mean, if Campbell were to be unfortunate here and get hurt, they'd be in a tough situation. So to have another more experienced goaltender come in to join them, even if that meant carrying 3 goaltenders, could very well be a scenario that is real and something that the Maple Leafs are looking into. So according to Friedman, they've contacted the Sabres about Linus Ullmark, trying to see what their plans are for him and his availability. As I mentioned yesterday, there was a variety of goaltenders that they've been rumored to at least be exploring, that they've either had talks with the other teams or at least talking and discussing internally is what we're hearing on the rumor mill here. Like, there's look at James Reimer we talked about yesterday in Carolina being a possibility. We know that the Coyotes are quite possible to trade a goalie, whether it be Kemper or Ranta. Obviously, depending on if they get a goalie with term, it's going to make things more complicated. So it's more likely that they get a rental if they do go down this road, and a lot of it's going to depend on if Anderson goes on LTIR or not. Like, they have to rework the deal in different ways. It really just boils down to a variety of things here. But, there's Jonathan Bernier. We've heard rumors before about Jonathan Quick, which I think is less likely here as well now. That's kind of seemed to have died down. Ullmark, Bernier, maybe even like a guy like Ryan Miller in Anaheim, for example. He's a pending UFA, a guy with a lot of experience. He could be somebody that they talk to. Reimer, like all those guys that are on expiring contracts without a huge cap hit that have experience are the most likely goalies I think that the Maple Leafs would target. And unless they decided to trade Anderson, then I would be the only way that I would see a higher profile goaltender be brought back to the Leafs, which I do think is pretty unlikely at this point. You never know. You can never say never in the NHL, but I don't think the odds are very high of that happening. Now, the Leafs have also been linked to looking at some forward options, adding some forward depth, and they've also been mentioned recently by Dave Pagnotta at thefourthperiod.com as one of 5 or 6 teams that are having a serious look at Sabres forward Taylor Hall. So, obviously, if they're inquiring on the cost for Hall, they're inquiring on the price for Ullmark, it could end up being a larger deal if they end up doing a deal with Buffalo. Not to say that that's definitely going to happen by any means, but, if they're having exploratory talks and just kind of seeing what the status of certain things are, what the cost is going to be. So just doing their due diligence to kind of figure out what they want to do before they approach them about getting more serious in trade conversations. That makes sense. I mean, Taylor Hall could be a good fit in Toronto. The other teams mentioned, though, by Pagnotta as having been linked to Hall, which most won't come as a surprise because we've talked about them before from other sources as well, includes the New York Islanders and Lou Lamoriello, who's looking for help to replace Anders Lee. You've got the Colorado Avalanche, who are looking to add with the hopes of really being another solid year of contending for the Stanley Cup. They're arguably one of the top teams out in the Western Division, of course, and of course one of the top teams that are going to likely contend here if everything goes the way they should. The Avs got a really strong team, and they were rumored to be in on the Taylor Hall sweepstakes last offseason before he signed in Buffalo as well. They were one of the teams that were reported as offering him a 1-year cheaper contract. Of course, you get more money in Buffalo, so that's where he ended up. But of course, the St. Louis Blues and the Florida Panthers are also mentioned here, and I think the Blues, to me, doesn't make sense. I'm not sure we're going to see Doug Armstrong really add to this team in St. Louis. I can see a situation being that they do get into playoffs, but it's not guaranteed. Get the Coyotes right on their heels. And we saw a move with Armstrong and the Blues a number of years back, not that long ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, when they traded Paul Stastny near the deadline when they were in the same sort of predicament. We know Armstrong's not afraid to make big moves, and just because they're likely going to be a playoff team, I don't see them necessarily adding. I think it might not be a great idea in my own personal opinion here, because I'm not sure that the Blues right now can really contend with Vegas and Colorado, and it might be a waste of assets if they try to do that. But, I guess time will tell. But obviously, there is some talk that the Blues could be sellers too, which we'll get into momentarily. But Taylor Hall is certainly a player that's 99.9% going to be traded. He does have some control over this as well, given the no move clause they gave him. So obviously he will dictate to a degree, but these teams, for the most part, all make sense. We know Florida's looking to add, but right now the blue line's likely their bigger concern than the forward group. And like I said, when it comes to the Islanders, the Leafs, those teams definitely make sense. I would even throw the Bruins in there as being a potential landing spot too. I mean, they haven't been talked a lot about in the rumor mill lately, but they've got some space and they've got some some possibilities that they could be working on here. And I would not rule out Hall maybe being a target of the Bruins, but I think they're looking at several guys as well, like these other teams. Like, they're not the only guy out there, and it's a combination of conversations are going to be taking place to determine where a lot of the dominoes end up falling closer to deadline day. So we'll see, but the Leafs are certainly involved with some conversations. There's certainly, at the very least, kicking tires or having some exploratory talks on some of the Sabres personnel that's likely going to be available here. Now, talking about St. Louis, now there are some talks about maybe a guy like a Mike Hoffman or a Vince Dunn actually being a trade deadline deal. I mean, like I mentioned, I'm not sure it makes sense for the Blues to be adding to this team. They could subtract and kind of create more of an opportunity for players that may not be back next year, like a guy like Hoffman or Dunn. We know Hoffman's only on a one-year deal. By no means a guarantee he returns next season, and Vince Dunn's been in a trade rumor mill pretty much since last offseason, so it's quite likely with all of their other blue liners that he is a trade chip. So it makes sense if they could restock here with some younger talent or some picks and prospects or whatever way they go, that those guys could find themselves on the moves. I mean, Mike Hoffman only signed a one-year contract for $4 million, so for them to retain a little bit of money and move him along for a good return is a real easy possibility. I mean, that's not something that's really all that much of a drastic deal. Same goes for Dunn, who's not making a ton of money. I mean, certainly teams looking for help at the forward group for Hoffman would make a lot of sense. You could throw the Bruins in there again. You could probably throw the Leafs in the mix, although I don't really see him being as a fit for Toronto myself. I think Hall would be a better fit than Hoffman, in my opinion. And Hoffman hasn't really fit the best in St. Louis, hasn't had a fantastic year. Not having a terrible year either, but certainly, fit better with Florida, fit better with Ottawa before that, but he just hasn't found that same kind of vibe with the St. Louis Blues this current season. And of course, the Islanders are another team you can throw in there as well. Like, a lot of the same teams bidding for a lot of the same types of players. When it comes to Vince Dunn, I mean, there's a variety of teams out there looking for blue line help. So, a team, again, like the Bruins could look for a left side shot D. I know the Jets are in the mix there. There was some talk about Vince Dunn in Montreal. I'm not really sure that would be what we see, but you never know. There's a lot of rumors about Bergevin making one more move and it likely being on the blue line. Would St. Louis maybe take back Victor Mete, get those guys a swap and change of scenery? I mean, that's a maybe. I'm not really sure, but there is a lot of people that I've seen online kind of connecting Montreal as being a potential suitor for Dunn. So I guess we'll have to check on that one and see what happens. And I also wouldn't rule out a team like the Flyers either. I mean, the Flyers are a team that's been rumored here by a few sources to be working on a big move after putting Gostisbehere on waivers. And they very well could be doing a potential deal maybe with St. Louis. Who knows? I mean, Vince Dunn could be a guy who gets a bigger opportunity in Philly. I mean, their blue line has been not really good at all, and they need some help. Not really sure Vince Dunn's going to help them on the defensive side of the game a whole lot, but he's a good puck mover and could help them that way. But we'll see. But those guys are potential Blues that could find themselves on the move due to their contract, even though they're kind of still hanging around and likely going to be a playoff team. There's a few teams out there that are likely going to be taking on some money in exchange for getting some extra assets, and you could throw the San Jose Sharks into the mix with the previously discussed team, the Chicago Blackhawks. We talked before that the Hawks were open for business. They have a lot of wiggle room due to the large amount of LTIR that they have available with so many players on out for the season, and they very well will be willing to take some bad contracts in exchange for some extra assets to sweeten the deal that they can be used for later. Obviously, they're not going to likely take a bad contract that has a lot of term on it, but if they have one that's, even if it's just a current season especially, that's something they would do, and you could throw San Jose into that mix here as well. It's also been believed that the Sharks are certainly open to making some deals. There's been a lot of interesting remarks that we've seen about their deadline activity that we could end up seeing. I mean, I know Marcus Sorensen's a likely player that gets traded. Some were talking about the possibility even of Erik Karlsson, which I don't see happening, just because he had made remarks that he didn't agree to sign with the Sharks long term to go through a rebuild, and didn't seem like he was happy and all that. But I don't. That's going to be impossible to trade. Karlsson will be a Shark, like it or not, for a long time. Even Brent Burns, he's making a lot of money, as much as they could consider that. Again, where's he going to go with that kind of contract? That's just problematic. If the Sharks make any other trades, it's likely going to be guys like Devan Dubnyk, Marcus Sorensen, some lower contract guys on somewhat expiring deals or short-term deals. That would be your more likely ones. I mean, I wouldn't completely rule out a possibility of maybe seeing them make some additional moves in the offseason, because they certainly have a lot of work to do to get back to being contenders, and some of their other guys, even like a Timo Myers, had a down season as well. So, when we get to the offseason, I would say a lot more is possible. But for now, I think the Sharks are likely going to be like a typical seller and only selling off a few expiring deals and reset for next year. But if they can get a bad deal in exchange for some future assets, which they desperately need, that's something that apparently Doug Wilson's very much willing to consider. So let me know your thoughts on all this discussion down below in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notification so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.